Hello, and welcome back to Cost Allocation and Responsibility Accounting. My name is Dr. Annette Moultrie. This is part two. However, we are continuing our discussion on Learning Objective 7.1, which is assign direct costs and allocate indirect costs using predetermined overhead allocation rates with single and multiple bases. So step one, identifying activities for allocating manufacturing overhead. Now, manufacturing overhead is allocated based on various activities that contribute to production. Some of the common activities used for the allocation include one, quality inspections, whereas you're examining raw materials or finished products to ensure quality standards. The other is shipping. Shipping is basically transporting finished goods to customers. Next, you have setups. Setups, you're preparing machines and equipment for production runs, and of course, purchasing, where the company is acquiring raw materials needed for manufacturing. So the first step in developing an activity-based costing or ABC system is to identify the activities that contribute to manufacturing overhead. Now, this process involves analyzing all tasks, required to produce a product or deliver a service. So by doing so, managers, they gain valuable insight into operational efficiency, whereas it is helping them determine whether certain activities can be improved, can it be streamlined, or even eliminated to reduce costs. So you see here for Smart Touch Learning, they determine the setup, the production, and testing of all three of these activities that you see. Setup, production, and testing. So the managers at Smart Touch Learning estimated each activity would incur the following overhead. They estimated that setup would be about 18,000, production 22,000, testing 60,000. So you see there's a lot that they anticipate in the testing phase of their product or services. So the total came to $100,000. Here you see in Exhibit 5, it illustrates how manufacturing overhead is allocated to the tablets at Smart Touch Learning. So you see here the ABC system. Manufacturing overhead leads to activities in the form of setup, production, and testing. Then you see setup leads to the allocation base number of batches. Production leads to the allocation based direct labor hours. And testing, it leads to the allocation based number of tests. Now, each allocation base leads to the cost objects in standard and premium models of the tablets for Smart Touch Learning. In step 2, identify the allocation base for each activity and estimate the total quantity of each allocation base. So step 2 of an activity-based accounting system is what you see here. They identify the allocation base for each activity, and then they estimate the total quantity of each allocation base. So here you see in Exhibit 6, it summarizes the data for each allocation base. Now, step 3, compute the predetermined overhead allocation rate for each activity. Now, step 3 of an activity-based costing system is what you see here. Okay? So what you do is you compute the predetermined overhead rate for each activity. You would use the same formula that you see here and the one shown earlier. So you have the formula that's total estimated overhead cost for the activity divided by total estimated quantity of the allocation base for the activity. So you see with the setup, the start fraction, $18,000, total estimated overhead cost over 45 batches, and fraction equals to the $400 per batch that you see. With the production, you see the $22,000 total estimated overhead cost divided by the direct labor hours of 12,500, then you get $1.76 per direct labor hour. And with the testing, you have the $60,000 total estimated overhead cost divided by 10,000 tests equals $6 per test. Okay, now we're into step 4, allocate indirect cost to the cost object. So in this step of the activity-based costing system, indirect costs are assigned to the standard model based on the actual usage of each activity's allocation base. So to do this, you first determine the quantity of the allocation base used for each activity. Then you would apply the predetermined overhead rate for that activity by multiplying it by the actual quantity of the allocation base consumed. Now, this would ensure that overhead costs are distributed accurately, reflecting the true cost of production. So here you see the standard tablets, and then you see the premium tablets. Predetermined overhead allocation rate times actual quantity of the allocation base used is equal to the allocated manufacturing overhead costs. So the manufacturing overhead cost per unit for the standard is $30.80 right here. And the manufacturing overhead cost per unit for the premium is $76.80. So the total production cost of each model, including direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead costs, are $268.80 for the standard model, and you have $424.80 for the premium model. Okay? Okay, so this is the end of part 2.